Okay, picture this. In the middle of a vast, empty desert in southern Iraq, two huge tank armies are barreling towards each other. This is the story of the Battle of 73 Easting. It's armored warfare at its absolute peak, and a lot of people call it the last great tank battle of the 20th century. So, let's get right into it.
All right, here's the game plan for how we're going to tackle this. First up, we're going to look at Saddam Hussein's big idea to build this fortress out in the desert. Then, we'll check out the coalition's totally unexpected, brilliant counterpunch. After that, we got to compare the machines themselves, the titans of the desert, before we dive headfirst into the pure chaos of the battle. And finally, we'll pull back to see the bigger picture, what this victory really meant and the complicated legacy it left behind. So, the whole thing really kicks off after Iraq invades its neighbor Kuwait. The world, wasn't having it. Saddam Hussein knew a massive coalition was coming his way, but he wasn't just going to sit there. He had a plan. See, he figured the US and its allies couldn't handle a lot of casualties. So his whole strategy was designed to make this as painful, as bloody as possible, kind of like the brutal trench warfare he'd seen in the Iran-Iraq War.
And it was a really specific three-step trap. Okay, so step one, dig in. He had the bulk of his army create this massive defensive line right on the border, basically to act like a giant sponge and soak up that first punch. Step two, bait the trap. The whole point of that sponge was to suck the coalition into this ugly head-on fight, and then, step three, the hammer. Once the coalition was stuck, bleeding, and bogged down, he'd unleash his best troops, the elite Republican Guard, to come in for the kill. But here's the thing. Saddam had this whole plan laid out, but the coalition, they had zero intention of playing his game. They came up with a strategy to just go around his entire desert fortress. And the only reason they could even think about pulling it off was thanks to a brand new piece of tech that was about to change everything.
And you can really see the genius of it here. Iraq was waiting for a head-on attack right into Kuwait, a totally predictable, bloody meat grinder. But the coalition's real plan was something else entirely, a massive flanking move. They call it the left hook. The idea was to swing way out through the western desert, a place everyone thought was impassable, and just slam into the Iraqi army from behind, cutting them off completely. Total surprise. So what was this game-changing tech? It wasn't a new tank, it wasn't a faster jet, it was GPS, the Global Positioning System. This was literally the first time it was used on a massive scale in a war. See, the Iraqis thought that western desert was impossible to cross because it's just a sea of sand. Their own troops got horribly lost out there. But for the coalition, GPS turned that featureless wasteland into a perfectly mapped-out highway for a massive invasion.
Okay, so the left hook is in full swing. The coalition forces are deep in Iraq, and they're closing in on Saddam's best troops, the Republican Guard. This is it. This is the moment that sets up a clash between two real titans of the desert. So let's do a little tail of the tape on the main battle tanks that are about to throw down.
All right, in one corner, you've got the Iraqi T-72, also known as the Lion of Babylon. It's a solid Soviet-era tank, It's fast, it's deadly. But in the other corner, you have the American M11 Abrams. Now, it's heavier, sure, and it has this advanced composite armor. But the real game changer, it's the tech inside. The Abrams had a gun stabilizer and thermal optics. What does that mean? Well, it means it could see heat signatures in total darkness or through a sandstorm. And this is the crazy part. It could fire its cannon with pinpoint accuracy while driving at full speed. The T-72 crews, they had to stop dead to aim and fire. And in a tank battle, that's a death sentence.
All right, now let's get right into the battle itself. We're zooming in on the U.S. 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. They're pushing east, and bam, they run smack into the teeth of the Republican Guards to Wakalana Division. It's on, and just as things are about to kick off, the weather just completely turns on them, and the whole battlefield descends into chaos.
I mean, just try to imagine it. You have spent your entire career training to fight this one specific enemy, and right as you're about to engage, a massive sandstorm just rolls in. Visibility drops to practically nothing. You'd think this would be an equalizer, right? Blinding for everybody? But for the Abrams crews, it actually became their single biggest advantage.
And here's the simple reason why. The thermal sights on the Abrams don't see light, they see heat. So through all that swirling dust and sand, the hot engine of an Iraqi tank might as well have been a giant glowing light bulb. The American crews could see them clear as day, while the Iraqi tankers were completely, totally blind.
This quote just perfectly captures that stunning, surreal moment. As the lead American tanks came up over a little ridge, they looked through their thermal sights and there it was. The entire Iraqi defensive line just laid out in front of them. And the Iraqis had no idea they were even there.
It was truly like a curtain being lifted on the whole battlefield.
So the Iraqis were actually using a textbook military tactic here. It's called a reverse slope defense. Basically, you hide your forces on the backside of a hill, so when the enemy comes over the crest, you pop up and ambush them. It's a smart move, or it used to be. But against the Abrams, it was useless. The thermal sights could pick up the heat signatures of the tank engines right through the sand dune, completely destroying any element of surprise.
And once the shooting actually began, another huge and frankly devastating difference between the two tanks became obvious, and it all came down to a design flaw in the Soviet-built T-72, and it was all about where they kept the ammo.
You see, the T-72 stored its ammunition in a carousel, right there in the crew compartment, with the soldiers. So when one of the Abrams shells punched through the armor, it would often set off a chain reaction, igniting all those shells at once. The explosion was so massive, it would literally blow the tank's turret clean off its body, sending it flying into the air. The soldiers had a grim name for it, the Jack-in-the-Box effect.
And if you want a perfect example of just how lopsided this was, get this. At one point in the battle, just 2 American Bradley fighting vehicles took out 5 Iraqi T-72s. And Bradleys aren't even tanks, they're lightly armored scout vehicles. That's how much of a technological mismatch this was.
The whole thing, the main part of the battle, was over in about 90 minutes, just an hour and a half. So let's pull the lens back now and look at the aftermath. What we find is one of the most one-sided victories in military history, but also a surprisingly complicated legacy.
The numbers are just unbelievable. In all that intense fighting, the U.S. forces lost 1 soldier. 1. On the Iraqi side, thousands of soldiers were lost, and something like 180 tanks and other armored vehicles were destroyed. I mean, it was an absolutely crushing victory and a textbook example of what happens when superior technology, training, and strategy all come together. But, and this is a big but, the victory leaves us with a really tough question. Because while this one Iraqi division was completely shattered, other parts of the Republican Guard made it out. And their survival is what allowed Saddam Hussein to hold on to power, crush uprisings, and stay a major problem for another decade. Which leads to this really challenging thought. Is it possible that this incredible military victory was actually, in the grand scheme of things, a kind of tragedy? Did it just set the stage for the next war in 2003? It's a complex and messy legacy for what was, truly, the last great tank battle of the 20th century.